The Conservatives are calling for an emergency investigation into allegations published in the Globe and Mail that the Prime Minister's office pressured the then Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould to intervene in a criminal investigation into the business dealings of the Quebec construction giant SNC-Lavalin. Now, the PMO allegedly wanted Wilson-Raybould to make some kind of deal. SNC-Lavalin would admit to wrongdoing in its bribery and fraud case relating to its business dealings in Libya, and then it would pay a fine. It's called a remediation agreement. But it would also allow them to avoid a criminal trial. The Prime Minister has carefully denied, quote, directing the Justice Minister to do anything. So did the Prime Minister's office try in any way to pressure Jody Wilson-Raybould to politically intervene in a judicial process? Is that why she was fired as the Justice Minister and moved to Veterans Affairs? Was the Prime Minister's office trying to protect the Quebec company? The current Attorney General and Justice Minister David Lametti joins us now in studio. Good to see you, sir.
Good morning.
And congratulations on the new post.
Thank you very much.
It's a pretty hot file right now. Did the Prime Minister in any way try to pressure the former Justice Minister to intervene in this case?
Prime Minister's been pretty clear, Evan, that he did not. He has said that publicly in the press. I repeated what he said in the House of Commons. He's done nothing that is inappropriate under the circumstances.
Okay, but
no direction and no pressure.
No direction and no pressure.
Well, he said he gave her no direction,
but no pressure is different because
right.
This is illegal. The criticism is he said I didn't direct her to do anything. That's very different.
Right.
The Globe published that she felt that the Prime Minister's office was pressured. Now you're saying there was no pressure. Is
well,
that
look, I can talk about what has happened with me, and there has been no pressure, and there has been no direction.
For you, you're only 3 weeks in.
But when I sit as Attorney General, when I sit as Minister of Justice in either of those two roles, in this case as Attorney General, I will make a decision on any matter based on the appropriate criteria. So, I have conversations with everybody. I'm a member of Parliament. I have conversations with my constituents. I'm now a member. When I was a member of Parliament, I had conversations with Cabinet, and PMO. Now, as a member of Cabinet, I have conversations with my colleagues. But when it comes down to making a decision as AG, as Attorney General, I will apply only the appropriate criteria.
But you may. Now, the question is, what happened? The allegation that the Prime Minister called false, and now you've corroborated, is that there was never any pressure put on Jody Wilson-Raybould. So let me ask you, Minister Lametti, did anyone in the Prime Minister's office communicate to Jody Wilson-Raybould about this case? Yes or no?
I can't. I can only tell you what the Prime Minister said. And,
okay.
and he has said, as he has repeated, and I can reassure Canadians, based on what the Prime Minister said, that nothing inappropriate happened.
But Gerald Butts, the Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister, did speak to her in December. She was demoted in January. What did he say to her then?
I can't. I wasn't privy to that conversation.
Then if you don't know, how can you come on and say, as you've said publicly, both in the House of Commons and here, how can you say with any degree of certainty that there was no pressure put on her if you don't know? Who told you there was no pressure?
The Prime Minister has said publicly, and I'm basing. The Prime Minister said that that the allegations contained in the Globe and Mail article were false. The Prime Minister has said that he did not direct my predecessor, so I'm basing it on what he has said publicly.
Okay, but you're a Justice Minister. Is that what he said he didn't direct? Is he skating using legal language around the idea that there's pressure, that there's room? He may have pressured her in other ways, the Prime Minister's office. Are you 100% confident that there was no pressure in any way, shape, or form?
I can't speak to a relationship that I wasn't privy to. That's clear. But what I can repeat to you and to Canadians is what the Prime Minister has said.
Okay. Why won't your former colleague, Jody Wilson-Raybould, if there was no pressure, it wouldn't break attorney-client privilege. If there's no pressure, she could have come out and said, I can tell you, I never felt pressure from the Prime Minister's office. She's never said that. Her silence is telling. Why not?
Again, I can't speak for my predecessor on this matter.
What does it tell you?
I have complete confidence in the Prime Minister on this matter, and I certainly feel that he has been reassuring publicly. And I'll repeat what he has said. But I wasn't privy to those conversations, so I can't go further.
But sir, I know you're a member of Cabinet, but your confidence in the Prime Minister, in this moment, you may have to recuse yourself and act solely as the Attorney General. I read you what Jody Wilson-Raybould wrote when she was demoted. She said, quote, Your job that you're in now has to be, quote, free from even the perception of political interference. If now there is the perception even that there was political interference, are you now obliged to call for an investigation as the Attorney General?
No, I mean, as the Attorney General, you are still a member of Cabinet, you still sit around the Cabinet table, and you still take in all relevant information. But at the moment you make a decision as Attorney General, you use only the appropriate criteria to make that decision, and I will do that.
Don't you feel, should you recuse yourself? There's discussions now about allegations that the Prime Minister's office pressured a justice minister. Should you now, to preserve the perception that this is an independent, no political interference, should you recuse yourself from Cabinet discussions about this now?
No, there hasn't been any reason to recuse myself in any discussions that I have been privy to up until now. Obviously, if there is ever a case where I feel that there's some sort of conflict, personal conflict on my part or situational conflict, I'll recuse myself. But I don't see any now. I certainly haven't seen any yet. And certainly, certainly in the situation you've just described, I don't see any sort of conflict.
Minister Lametti, would you support, because of this perception, because these allegations are so important, would you support an emergency investigation on the Judicial Committee to talk about this and investigate who knew what when, who said what when?
I'll let the committee decide. The committee is master of its own docket, but certainly from what I have seen and what the Prime Minister has said, I can reassure Canadians that there has been nothing inappropriate that has happened.
But to be fair, you're only reassuring based on the Prime Minister's word. The entire story hinges on if that's true. Right. Why would you, as the Justice Minister, take the Prime Minister's word and not want an investigation to preserve the independence of the system?
Again, all we've heard are allegations in a newspaper. The Prime Minister has said that these allegations are false. We haven't had any corroborating evidence there. There hasn't been anything, to my mind, that justifies a committee investigation.
Would you be open to an investigation?
It's up to the committee to do what it wants to do.
Well, your government, in the last budget bill, this is also an important element of the case.
Right.
In this omnibus bill, you put in a deferred prosecution agreement, this remediation agreement. Tell us how this works, because some people said this was called the SNC part of the bill, made specifically to help SNC-Lavalin avoid a criminal trial and actually be able to pay a fine. How does this work? Can you, as the Justice Minister, say to the Public Prosecution Office, don't go to trial for these guys, please give them a remediation agreement?
As a final step, I could issue a directive, but the Public Prosecution Service is an independent service. I'm going to let them operate because they are a delegated authority from the Attorney General, but they get to operate independently. That's part of our rule of law system, and the Director has done so in this case. There is a specific set of rules that would allow the Attorney General to direct in a public process, in a transparent process through the Canada Gazette. And that remains a possibility, but I'm not going to comment on the possibility of that now because that current case is before the courts. So there is nothing to impugn our rule of law standards there. We respect the rule of law. We believe in the rule of law. And as Attorney General, I'm going to protect the rule of law. And let me just add one thing, Evan, sure. That nothing could be further from the truth to say that that is the SNC-Lavalin law. That law was brought in because it was lagging in our system. Most of our allies have this kind of law, the UK being the prime example, and it was done only after public consultations. So there were a number of different people calling for that kind of remedial agreement. We've got Canadian companies that do business all over the world, and this was seen as a necessary step and a gap in our own system, comparatively based on our allies' experience.
Have you spoken to Jody Wilson-Raybould, the former Justice Minister, and just asked her straight out, did you ever feel pressured? If she did, you would have to, I would say you'd be obliged to call an investigation. Have you picked up the phone and called her?
I have had a number of different conversations with the minister about her record, about moving forward and advancing a number of things that she had begun. But I'm not going to well, I haven't had a discussion on this matter, and frankly, I'm not sure it would be something that I would do. And if it was,
why not? I'm just afraid. Why would you just pick up? Did you feel pressure by the Prime Minister's office? That would be important in your job. If she says, you know what, I did, that would be a really important admission. If she says no, you would have full confidence to say, I trust the Prime Minister. So why don't you pick up the phone?
I have my job to do as Minister of Justice and Attorney General. I will do that job as a responsible member of Cabinet, but also wearing those hats, I will take those responsibilities very seriously to protect the rule of law.
The repercussions of this could be serious, as you know. If there indeed is the perception or the allegation of political interference in this case, does that undermine the credibility of the government on other cases, specifically the Meng Wanzhou case, the Huawei executive that's being detained in Vancouver? Our government has said there's no political interference in the judicial process. Now there's allegations that that actually happened. Does this undermine the credibility, for example, in the eyes of the Chinese?
Two very different cases. We have an extradition treaty with the United States, and we have a process that's been in place for a number of years in Canada that is a judicial process to respect those obligations to our extradition treaty partners, if you will, and to protect the due process rights of any person that's been accused and detained. We'll continue to follow that process. I will not intervene. I won't pronounce on that process at all because it's before the courts.
Eventually you will, though, right? Just so people understand, there is a moment where it may land on your desk. So is China right that eventually there is a political element to this, that you look at the evidence and then you can make a decision both legally but also politically? Do you use political factors to determine whether or not this woman could be extradited?
The case has such a high degree of scrutiny right now that it would be unwise for me to talk about the kinds of criteria that would be applied. For the time being, the case is before the courts, and I'm not going to say anything that might prejudice my ability to make a fair decision at some point down the road. So I'm going to leave it to the courts for now. That's where it's properly discussed and debated. Ms. Meng has counsel in Canada. She is adequately defended, and we'll wait and see how that court process proceeds.
One last thing. Because now that you've got the Meng Wanzhou case, now you've got the allegations about your former justice minister, and now there's the Mark Norman case, the second in command of the military, who is on trial now for allegedly leaking cabinet confidence relating to a shipping contract in Quebec. Again, there's been suggestions that there's political interference, not giving enough evidence so he can defend himself, not taking notes, and even more powerfully, they point out, the Prime Minister himself, before there was a case, said this situation is going to end up in front of the courts. Was that, again, now the Attorney General, did the Prime Minister, by saying that before there was a trial, put his thumb on the scale and in some way politically interfere with this, basically sending a message to the RCMP, put this guy on trial? I'm saying it's going to end up in the courts. Was that a mistake for the Prime Minister to say?
Again, I'm not going to pronounce on that. What I can say is that I've been assured by the Attorney General's office that we are participating fully in the court process, in the sense that any third-party request for documents is being complied with by officials in the department. And again, the case is before the courts, and I can't comment on it.
You can't comment on that.
Can't comment on it.
Last question. You voted against the government's assisted dying bill. You thought it was actually too restrictive. Will you change that? There's a lot of cases that say, for example, the so-called Audrey's bill, that they want to make sure that you don't have to have late-stage consent, so you need to give consent, but in the event that you become mentally incapacitated, many people argue you don't need that second late-stage consent. Right. Will you change the bill to do that?
I participated in that process. The Prime Minister gave us a free vote. I participated in that process in good faith, advanced my opinions. We as a government came up with a compromise position. And as someone who respects the rule of law and parliamentary process, I respect that compromise. In that piece of legislation, there's a 5-year window, and the next Parliament will deal with reviewing the legislation thoroughly after 5 years. In the meanwhile, as Minister of Justice, I will continue to watch what is happening in the courts. I will continue to watch what is happening on the ground. We'll get better data as we move forward.
But personally, would you like to make the change?
Well, I won't. Personally, I can't speak personally anymore. I'm now the Minister of Justice. And so I'm defending this piece of legislation and the legislative process that led to this piece of legislation, and the legislative process that will look at this legislation again in a future Parliament.
All right, I got to leave it there. Minister of Justice, David Lametti, I really appreciate you joining us this morning.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.